The evening air hung warm and thick, laced with jasmine and the scent of cut grass. I was on the front porch, same place I sat every evening around this time, cradling a chipped ceramic mug of mint tea in both hands. My house, the two-story wooden frame Walter and I bought back in '79, stood quiet behind me. Walter's been gone 10 years now, but I still keep things just as we had them. Neat, simple, and full of memory. The porch swing creaked soft beneath me, matching the rhythm of my breathing while the sun dropped behind the pecan trees. At 67, I still tracked every dime in an old notebook, the pages worn thin and smudged with ink. I'd raised a family on that kind of care. The house was filled with the lives we built. Framed photos on every shelf, books with yellowed pages, a dining table scratched from decades of use. This place, it held more than furniture. It held proof of who we were. My son, Roland, lives down in Houston now. Got his wife, Kimberly, and their kids. Talia, 16. Jerome just turned 19. I've always done what I could for them. Helped with school clothes, paid Jerome's college fees, even gave a down payment on their home when they needed it. Roland used to call and thank me. He used to sound like my boy. Lately, the phone's been quieter. The warmth in his voice, it's thinned out like the space between calls. That night, I noticed a letter in the mailbox. White envelope, sharp corners, one of those you know won't bring good news. I opened it right there under the porch light, the paper fluttering in my hands like a nervous bird. It was from the bank. The joint account Roland and I had, the one we set aside for family emergencies, it was nearly empty. I froze, not from fear, not at first. Just a slow realization settling in my chest like a stone. I hadn't touched that money. I hadn't needed to. I flipped through the letter again, hoping I'd read it wrong. I hadn't. Back inside, I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Roland used to do his homework while Walter read the newspaper. I opened my notebook. My last entry showed the balance where it should have been. Safe, secure, ours. Now it was all but gone. I reached for the phone, that old rotary one Walter couldn't bear to replace, and dialed Roland's number. He answered after 2 rings. "Hey, Mama," he said, voice distracted. I could hear the TV in the background. "What's up?" I kept my tone steady. "Roland, I got a letter from the bank. The account's nearly drained. You know anything about that?" There was a long pause. Too long. "Oh yeah," he said. "It's under control. Don't worry about it." My fingers tightened around the phone. "Roland, did you take the money?" Another pause. "We had some things come up. I'll take care of it, all right? I gotta go. Kimberly's calling me." Click. Just like that, the line went dead. I sat there a long moment, holding the silence, listening to the low hum of the dial tone. Something shifted inside me. Not anger, not yet, just the slow ache of disappointment blooming into something colder. I stepped back out onto the porch, the swing still moving from earlier, and eased into it again. The stars had come out clearer now, the sky wide and full. But they didn't offer any comfort. I took a sip of my tea, it had gone cold. I thought about Walter, how he would have handled this. He built this house with his hands, planted roses every spring, told me once, "A home is where your people do right by you." And I believe that. I still want to. But the truth is, love alone doesn't always hold things together. I folded the bank letter into my sweater pocket and looked out across the yard. Everything looked the same, but something had shifted. Quietly, permanently. And that night, under the stars and the weight of too many unasked questions, I knew. Some truths, even from the ones we love, come slow, but when they do, they land hard. A week after the unsettling bank letter, I drove to Houston for Talia's 16th birthday. The hour-long trip from Liberty was familiar, the highway flanked by sprawling fields and billboards, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying Roland's evasive words on the phone. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles tight, trying to shake the unease that had settled in my bones. The gift bag on the passenger seat held a silver charm bracelet for Talia, chosen with care, each charm a nod to her love for music and books. I hoped it would bring a smile, a moment of connection, but doubt gnawed at me as I neared their house. Roland's home was a modern 2-story in a tidy Houston suburb, its wide windows gleaming under the late afternoon sun. I had helped pay for the furniture that filled it: sleek leather sofas, a dining table of polished oak, back when Roland and Kimberly were starting out. Parking in their driveway, I took a deep breath, smoothing my dress before stepping out. The air smelled of grilled meat and honeysuckle, a faint hum of celebration drifting from the backyard. I carried the gift bag and my homemade pecan pie, its crust golden and perfect, a recipe Walter had loved. Inside, the house buzzed with activity. Kimberly greeted me at the door, her bright red dress striking against the neutral walls. Her smile was polite, but strained, like a mask that didn't quite fit. "Edna, so good to see you," she said, her voice smooth as she took the pie. "Come on in, we're just setting up." I nodded, following her through the foyer, past framed photos of Talia and Jerome, none of which included me. The living room was crowded with relatives and friends, their laughter loud but distant to my ears. Jerome spotted me first, his face lighting up as he crossed the room. "Grandma," he called, wrapping me in a hug. At 19, he was tall and lanky, his college life in Austin giving him a new confidence. "Missed you," he said, and I felt a flicker of warmth, the only genuine welcome I'd received. Talia was in the corner, engrossed in her phone, her dark curls falling over her face. She glanced up, gave a quick wave, then returned to her screen. Roland was at the grill outside, visible through the sliding glass doors, his back turned as he flipped burgers. The dining room table was set with paper plates and plastic cups, a casual setup Kimberly preferred. She poured wine for the adults, her movements brisk, her smile never reaching her eyes. I took a seat near Jerome, hoping to catch up, but the conversation swirled around me. School events, neighborhood gossip, a new car someone had bought. I listened, nodding occasionally, feeling like a guest in a house I'd helped build. Dinner was served, a spread of burgers, coleslaw, and my pie, though no one mentioned it was mine. As we ate, I couldn't hold back any longer. The bank letter weighed on me, its implications too heavy to ignore. I turned to Roland, who sat across the table, his eyes fixed on his plate. "Roland," I said softly, keeping my voice steady, "I noticed the joint account is almost empty. Do you know what happened?" The room didn't fall silent, but I felt a shift, a tightening in the air. Roland's fork paused midair, and before he could speak, Kimberly cut in. "Edna," she said, her tone sweet but sharp, like honey laced with vinegar, "we're adults. We've got our finances handled. No need to poke into our business." Her words landed like a slap, polite but cutting. Her smile fixed as she sipped her wine. Roland said nothing, his gaze dropping to his plate, his silence louder than any response. Talia giggled, her eyes still on her phone, as if my question was a joke. Jerome shifted uncomfortably beside me, but he didn't speak. My cheeks burned, a flush of humiliation I hadn't felt in years, but I forced a nod, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Let's talk about something else," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. "How's school, Talia?" She shrugged, mumbling about exams, and the conversation moved on, leaving me on the outside. I picked at my food, the burger tasteless, the chatter around me a blur. I wanted to press Roland, to demand answers, but Kimberly's words echoed in my mind, drawing a line I hadn't seen coming. After dinner, I helped clear the table, carrying plates to the kitchen. Kimberly was rinsing glasses, her back to me, when I overheard her whispering to Roland, who had followed her in. "She's too involved, Roland," she hissed, her voice low but clear. "She needs to back off. It's time we cut this." I froze, a plate in my hands, my heart pounding. Roland murmured something I couldn't catch, but his lack of defense stung more than her words. I set the plate down quietly, my hand steady despite the ache in my chest, and slipped out of the kitchen. The party continued, but I was done. I found Talia to give her the bracelet, her thanks distracted as she scrolled through her phone. Jerome hugged me again, promising to call soon, but even his warmth couldn't ease the cold settling inside me. I left without saying goodbye to Roland or Kimberly, slipping out the front door into the humid night. In my car, the gift bag empty beside me, I drove back to Liberty, the dark highway stretching endlessly ahead. Their words replayed: Kimberly's dismissal, Roland's silence, Talia's indifference, and I realized my family had drawn me out of their circle, leaving me on the edge of their lives. Back home, I sat at my kitchen table, the house silent except for the tick of the clock. I opened my notebook, its pages a record of my care, my sacrifices. With a pen, I wrote a single line: I am no longer their wallet. The words stared back at me, stark and true, as the weight of their rejection settled into something new. Not just pain, but a quiet resolve. The weeks following Talia's birthday dragged on, each day heavy with the silence that had settled between me and Roland's family. I spent my mornings at the kitchen table in my Liberty home, the same table where I had once helped Roland with his spelling tests, now covered with bank statements and my worn notebook. I pored over the account records, my eyes tracing the numbers that confirmed my worst fears. Roland had transferred large sums to an account in Kimberly's name, thousands of dollars, including the savings I had set aside for a new roof. The withdrawals were unauthorized, made without a word to me, as if my life's work was theirs to spend. My hand shook as I marked each transaction in red ink, the evidence of their betrayal stark on the page. I dialed Roland's number again, hoping for an explanation, but the call went to voicemail, his recorded voice cheerful and distant. I left a message, keeping my tone even. Roland, we need to talk about the account. Call me back. He didn't. I tried again the next day, and the day after, but the silence grew thicker, a wall I couldn't breach. Kimberly sent a single text. Her words cold and clipped: we'll handle it. The message felt like a door slammed shut, her dismissal echoing the sharp edge of her voice at the birthday dinner. Even Jerome, who had always been my ally, was evasive when I called him. I'm just busy with school, Grandma, he said, his voice strained, and I sensed he was holding something back. The quiet of my house, once a comfort, now felt oppressive, amplifying every creak of the floorboards and tick of the clock. I walked through the rooms, touching the bookshelves Walter had built, the framed photos of Roland as a boy, his gap-toothed smile frozen in time. I had raised him to be honest, to value family, but the man he'd become felt like a stranger. I sat on the porch swing each evening, the creak of its chains a steady rhythm, trying to make sense of how my love had been twisted into something they could take without asking. One morning, as I sipped my coffee, the mail arrived with a thick envelope from a law firm in Houston. I opened it, expecting a routine document, but the words on the page stopped my breath. Roland had filed a petition for guardianship over me, claiming I was incapable of managing my financial affairs due to cognitive decline. The accusation hit like a physical blow, my vision blurring as I read it again. I was 67, healthy, my mind as sharp as ever. My notebook, with its meticulous records, was proof of that. Every penny accounted for, every expense tracked. Yet here was my son, trying to strip me of my independence, to paint me as frail and confused to gain control of my money. I sat frozen at the table, the letter trembling in my hands, anger and disbelief warring inside me. How could Roland do this? The boy I had raised, who had cried in my arms when his dog died, who had promised to make me proud. How could he betray me so completely? I thought of Kimberly's whispered words in the kitchen, her plan to cut this, and realized this was their endgame. They wanted my savings, my home, my dignity, and they were willing to erase me to get it. That afternoon, I drove to Houston to meet Loretta Brown, a friend, an attorney who had handled Walter's estate years ago. Her office was small, cluttered with files, but her presence was steady, her eyes sharp with understanding. I handed her the letter, my voice quiet but firm. Roland's trying to take everything, Loretta. He's saying I'm not fit to manage my own life. She read the document, her lips pressing into a thin line, and when she looked up, her expression was grim. Edna, they're after your assets, she said plainly. This guardianship petition is a power grab. If they succeed, Roland could control your finances, your property, everything. We need to act fast. She leaned forward, her voice softening. You're not alone in this. We'll fight it. Her words were a lifeline, pulling me back from the edge of despair. I nodded, my resolve hardening. What do we do? I asked, and Loretta outlined a plan. Freeze the accounts, revoke Roland's access, and gather evidence to counter the guardianship claim. She would request a medical evaluation to prove my competency, something no court could ignore. I left her office with a folder of documents and a spark of hope, though the weight of Roland's betrayal still pressed against my chest. That evening, I sat on my porch, the air cooler now, the jasmine scent fading as autumn approached. I held a framed photo of Walter, his smile warm even in the grainy image, and traced his face with my finger. I won't let them break me, I whispered as if he could hear. I thought of the life we had built, the sacrifices we had made for Roland, the love that had once filled this house. I couldn't let it end like this, reduced to a signature on a guardianship form. I went inside and called Loretta, my voice steady despite the ache in my heart. Freeze the accounts, I said. Revoke Roland's power of attorney. Whatever it takes. She promised to start the process first thing in the morning. I hung up, feeling a shift inside me. Not just anger, but a quiet strength I hadn't tapped in years. I opened my notebook and wrote a new entry, not of expenses but of purpose. I will not let my son erase me. The words anchored me, a vow to myself and to Walter's memory. As I closed the notebook, the creak of the porch swing drifted through the open window, a reminder that I was still here, still fighting, still whole. After Loretta's promise to freeze the accounts, I moved with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table in Liberty, the early light filtering through the lace curtains, and opened my laptop. My fingers, steady despite the weight of betrayal, logged into the bank's website. The joint account I shared with Roland stared back at me, its balance a pitiful shadow of what it had been. I clicked through the options, transferring every remaining dollar to a new account in my name only, one Roland didn't know existed. The confirmation email arrived minutes later, a quiet victory in black and white. I closed the joint account entirely, the finality of the action settling over me like a deep breath. Roland's access was gone, severed with a few clicks. I called Loretta to confirm the next steps. She had already drafted a lawsuit, accusing Roland of financial fraud for the unauthorized transfers. Her voice was calm but firm over the phone. We're building a strong case, Edna. I've requested copies of all transactions and communications. We'll need more evidence to seal this. I nodded, though she couldn't see me, and agreed to meet her later that week. The idea of a lawsuit felt daunting, but it was necessary, a way to reclaim what was mine. I wasn't just fighting for money. I was fighting for my place in the world, for the right to exist as more than a resource to be drained. To strengthen our case, I hired a private investigator, a man Loretta recommended named Carl Hayes. He was a quiet, middle-aged Texan with a knack for uncovering what people tried to hide. I met him at a diner outside Liberty, the kind with sticky tables and coffee that tasted like it had been brewed all day. I handed him a folder with my bank statements and the guardianship petition. I need proof of what they've done, I said, my voice low. Anything you can find, transfers, emails, social media. Carl nodded, jotting notes in a small pad. I'll dig deep, Mrs. Wilson. People always leave a trail. He found more than I expected. Bank records showing Roland's transfers to Kimberly's account, emails between them discussing Mama's money, and Kimberly's public Instagram post flaunting a new SUV, captioned, "Living Our Best Life." Each piece was a shard of truth, sharp and undeniable. A few days later, Jerome showed up at my doorstep unannounced. His knock was hesitant, and when I opened the door, his face was heavy with guilt. He stood there, his backpack slung over one shoulder, looking younger than his 19 years. "Grandma, can we talk?" he asked, and I stepped aside, gesturing to the living room. We sat on the old plaid couch, the one Walter used to nap on, and Jerome's words spilled out. "Kimberly told me not to say anything," he admitted, his eyes fixed on the floor. "She said if I told you about the money, they'd stop paying for my school." I didn't know what to do. His voice cracked, and I saw the weight he'd been carrying. I reached over, pulling him into a hug, his frame trembling against me. "You're not to blame, Jerome," I said, my voice soft but certain. "You're with me now." In that moment, I knew Jerome would be part of my plan, not one of vengeance, but of justice, of rebuilding what had been broken. He agreed to stay with me for a while, his presence a reminder of why I was fighting. We talked late into the night, and he shared more. Kimberly's lavish spending, Roland's quiet complicity, the way they justified it by saying I was too old to need the money. Their words stung, but they also fueled me, sharpening my resolve. The next step was harder. I decided to sell my house in Liberty, the home where I'd raised Roland, where Walter's laughter had once echoed. It wasn't just a building, it was a piece of my soul, its walls holding decades of love and loss. But staying felt wrong, like living in a museum of betrayal. I called a realtor, a kind woman named Susan who understood my need for a quick sale. She walked through the house, noting its sturdy bones and charming quirks, the stained glass window in the hallway, the rose bushes Walter had planted. "This place has heart," she said, and I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Within a week, a young couple made an offer, drawn to the idea of starting their family where mine had begun. I signed the papers, my hands steady, though my heart ached as I packed away Walter's tools and my old library books. Before leaving Liberty, I asked Loretta to find me a new home in Houston, close to Roland and Kimberly. I wasn't running away. I wanted to be near enough to remind them I was still here, still standing. Loretta found a small cottage just 2 blocks from their house, a one-story with a tidy garden and a porch perfect for a swing. I drove to see it, the neighborhood quiet and tree-lined, and felt a spark of possibility. This would be my new beginning, a place where I could redefine my life on my terms. I put in an offer that day, my savings secure in the new account, untouchable by Roland's hands. As I packed the last boxes in Liberty, Jerome helped, his quiet strength a comfort. We loaded my books, my teapot, and Walter's favorite quilt into the car, leaving behind the weight of what couldn't be salvaged. I stood on the porch one final time, the swing creaking softly, and whispered a goodbye to the house that had held my past. My plan was taking shape, not in anger, but in silence, a deliberate reclaiming of my power. Roland and Kimberly thought they could erase me, but they didn't know the strength I carried, the roots I'd plant anew. With the sale of my Liberty house finalized, I closed on the Houston cottage, a modest one-story just 2 blocks from Roland and Kimberly's home. The moment I stepped inside, I felt a quiet promise in its clean lines and sunlit rooms. It had a small garden out back, overgrown but eager for care, and a wide veranda that begged for a swing like the one I'd left behind. I signed the papers, my savings secure in my new account, and drove to the cottage with Jerome, our car packed with boxes and the pieces of my life I'd chosen to keep. The neighborhood was calm, its streets lined with oaks, and as I unlocked the front door, I felt a weight lift, not fully, but enough to breathe. Jerome moved in with me, his decision swift and certain after our talks in Liberty. At 19, he was ready to distance himself from his parents' choices, and I welcomed his company, his laughter filling the empty spaces of the cottage. We spent days unpacking, painting the walls a soft cream that caught the morning light. Jerome hauled cans of paint and rollers, joking about his lack of artistic skill, while I directed him with a smile, my heart lighter in his presence. In the garden, we planted rose bushes, their roots sinking into the Texas soil as a quiet echo of Walter's old garden. Inside, we hung photos, Jerome as a toddler, Walter and me on our wedding day, Talia's 5th birthday, but none of Roland or Kimberly. Their absence was deliberate, a boundary drawn in silence. The veranda became my sanctuary. I installed a swing, its chains creaking just like the one in Liberty, and spent mornings there with a mug of coffee, watching the neighborhood wake. One humid morning, as I sipped my coffee, a familiar car slowed on the street. Kimberly was behind the wheel, her sunglasses glinting in the sun. She spotted me on the veranda and hit the brakes, her face paling as our eyes met. I raised my mug in a small wave, my smile calm but unyielding. She stared for a moment, then sped off, her tires kicking up dust. The encounter was brief, but it sent a thrill through me, not of spite but of presence. I was here, visible, undeniable. Later that day, Roland showed up at my door unannounced. His knock was sharp, and when I opened the door, he stood there, keys jangling in his hand, his shoulders hunched. "Mama," he said, his voice tight, "what are you doing here? Why this house?" I stepped onto the veranda, closing the door behind me, and met his gaze. "I'm living my life, Roland," I said evenly, "just like you're living yours." He shifted, his eyes darting to the swing, the roses, the cottage that was mine alone. He opened his mouth, then closed it, unable to find words. "You didn't have to move so close," he finally muttered, but I just shrugged. "It's where I want to be," I said, and turned back inside, leaving him on the steps. The lawsuit Loretta had filed came to a head soon after. We met at the Houston courthouse, a gray building that loomed over the street. I wore my best dress, simple but pressed, and sat beside Loretta as she presented our case. The evidence Carl had gathered was damning. Bank records of Roland's transfers, Kimberly's emails joking about easy money, her social media posts showing off purchases my savings had funded. Loretta's voice was steady as she argued Roland's fraud and the baselessness of his guardianship petition. I sat silently, my hands folded, watching Roland across the room. He avoided my gaze, his face drawn, while Kimberly, absent, was represented only by her lawyer's weak rebuttals. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes, reviewed the documents and my medical evaluation, which confirmed my full competency. Her ruling was swift. Roland's guardianship petition was denied, his actions deemed fraudulent. He was barred from accessing my assets, and the court ordered him to repay the misappropriated funds, though I knew that was unlikely. As the gavel fell, I felt a rush of relief, like a knot untying in my chest. Loretta squeezed my hand, her smile small but triumphant. I thanked her, my voice steady, but as we left the courtroom, I glanced back at Roland. He sat alone, his head bowed, and despite everything, my heart ached for the son I'd lost, the boy who was no longer mine. Driving back to the cottage, I let the verdict settle over me. The law had affirmed my strength, my clarity, but the cost was a fracture I couldn't mend. Jerome was waiting on the veranda, a glass of iced tea in hand. "You okay, Grandma?" he asked, and I nodded, sitting beside him on the swing. The creak of the chains was a familiar comfort, grounding me in this new life I was building, one where I defined my own worth. Months passed since the courtroom victory, and Jerome and I settled into a rhythm in the Houston cottage. The days took on a gentle cadence, each one a step further from the pain of Roland's betrayal. I woke early, the morning light spilling across the veranda where my swing creaked softly. I tended to the rose bushes in the garden, their blooms vibrant against the green, a quiet tribute to Walter's love for growing things. Jerome, now 20, filled the house with his energy, leaving textbooks scattered on the kitchen table and playing music that echoed through the open windows. We cooked together, laughed over burnt pancakes, and built a life that felt like home. I joined a local gardening club, a group of women who met weekly at the community center. Their hands, like mine, were lined with age, but their spirits were fierce. We swapped tips on pruning and soil, and I found solace in their stories of resilience. They didn't know my past, but they welcomed me, offering cuttings from their own gardens and cups of sweet tea. One afternoon, I brought a bouquet of my roses to the meeting, their petals deep red, and the women clapped, calling them the pride of the club. I smiled, feeling a pride of my own, not just for the flowers, but for the life I was reclaiming. Jerome received a scholarship to continue his studies at the University of Texas, a relief that eased the financial strain he'd feared under his parents' threats. He came home one evening, waving the acceptance letter, his grin wide. "I'm staying in school, Grandma," he said, and I hugged him tightly, my heart full. We celebrated with pizza and soda, sitting on the veranda as the sun set, the swing creaking under our weight. His success felt like a victory for both of us, a sign that we could build something new, free from the shadows of Roland and Kimberly. I donated a portion of the money from the Liberty House sale to a program for seniors in my old town, naming it the Walter Wilson Fund. The idea came to me one quiet morning as I sat with my coffee, thinking of how Walter had always helped others. The fund supported meal deliveries and social events for elderly residents, a way to honor his memory and give back to the community that had shaped us. I drove to Liberty for the fund's launch, a small gathering at the town hall. Standing at the podium, I shared my story, not the details of Roland's actions, but the strength I'd found in setting boundaries, in choosing myself. The crowd, mostly familiar faces from my library days, listened intently, and when I finished, they applauded, some wiping tears. A woman my age squeezed my hand afterward, whispering, "You've given us courage." I drove back to Houston that night, the stars bright above, feeling Walter's presence in the quiet. Roland and Kimberly faded from my life like a photograph left in the sun. Neighbors mentioned their struggles, arguments loud enough to spill into the street, a for sale sign on their lawn, but I didn't seek details. Their troubles were theirs, no longer mine to carry. I didn't wish them ill. I simply lived, my days filled with purpose that didn't depend on their approval. Each morning, I watered the roses, their scent mingling with the coffee I sipped on the veranda. I opened my notebook, not to track expenses, but to write a single truth. I am my choices. The words grounded me, a reminder that my life was mine to shape. One evening, as I sorted through mail, I found a letter from Talia. Her handwriting was unsteady, the envelope creased from travel. I set it on the kitchen table, unopened, and poured a glass of tea. When I finally read it, her words were raw, a 16-year-old's attempt at amends. "I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you," she wrote. "I miss you, Grandma. Can we talk?" I folded the letter and slipped it into a drawer, not ready to respond. Talia's apology stirred something in me. Hope, perhaps, but also caution. I needed time, space to protect the peace I'd fought for. I wasn't closing the door on her, but I wasn't rushing to open it either. That night, I sat on the veranda, the swing creaking as I gazed at the stars. The Texas sky was vast, each pinprick of light a story of its own. I thought of the years I'd spent giving, loving, sacrificing, and how they'd led me here, to a life that was wholly mine. The ache for Roland lingered, a quiet bruise, but it no longer defined me. Jerome joined me, carrying a blanket against the evening chill, and we sat together, the silence comfortable. The creak of the swing was a melody, a song of freedom that I'd earned, one sway at a time.